0. Okay, so hopefully this thing is recording now. So hi all. Well, all of you who have taken the time to get a copy of the course syllabus, either off of the CU Learn website or the department website, should probably know my name, but it's up there anyway. My name is Colin Cordner. I am a going on 6th year PhD candidate here at Carleton. My particular fields of expertise or specialties are political theory and philosophy and international relations theory. So that's approximately where I'm coming from. My own particular interests, insofar as those go, are actually, for the most part, on ancient philosophy, but also philosophy of history, philosophy of consciousness, epistemology, and a bunch of other really, really obscure words which most people won't define for you during this program, but which we'll go over once or twice, just so you actually know what they mean. Previous to coming here to Carleton, I did my MA here at Carleton as well, 2008, 2010. I'm also specialized in political theory, and did my BA at Concordia University in Montreal, which is still one of the better universities for doing political theory and philosophy in Canada, right up there with U of T, Carleton, and maybe Brock, I suppose, would probably be pretty good as well. So that's approximately where I'm coming from. As you can see, my office is at A637. I'm keeping regular office hours from approximately, 11 to 12 o'clock on Fridays. However, if you are incredibly needful of some sort of advice or talk things out or anything else of the sort, and you can't make those office hours, just email me or talk to me after class or before class, and we'll try to figure out some hours that actually work for both of us, right? I know a lot of you are probably working summer jobs. Some of you are probably maybe taking a class or two on the side, aside from this, and I'll do my best to accommodate where I can. Now, aside from that, we should get on to the matter of the course content, I suppose. Now, this class is going to be a bit of an experiment. It's not very easy, generally speaking, to teach political theory in a 6-week time span. I know a lot of you have also taken the previous section, Professor Fitzpatrick's. I'm guessing you found that a lot was being crammed into a very small space, and you're expected to really make humongous leaps in your way of thinking about things in a very short time span. Typically or historically, the way this class gets taught at Carleton is to put a lot of emphasis upon the history of ideas. That is to say, to try to draw out a very long chain of history by which certain ideas or concepts got originally coined and then got handed down through history, with a focus, of course, on how it got handed down in Western history, Western civilization. The way in which I'm going to be approaching this next 6 weeks is to put a lot less emphasis upon memorization of facts. Because quite frankly, whether or not this approach of fact memorization was ever useful to anybody ever, and probably has been occasionally, in a day where basically everybody has a smartphone in their pocket, the ability to memorize facts is kind of useless and redundant. So my own interest is not so much trying to drill things into your head, treating you as some sort of tabula rasa, and pouring as much knowledge as possible into you so that you can do the old trick of trying to regurgitate as much as possible on a final exam. I don't think that really helps you too much. It doesn't help you become anything resembling a scientist, really, to just be memorizing things. And so the way in which I will be running this class will put a lot more emphasis upon what I've called Socratic dialogue, or the Socratic approach. Now, how that'll work in practice is that I will spend usually a good chunk of time at the beginning of each lecture period actually lecturing, probably, hopefully, cutting myself off before the hour-and-a-half mark. So roughly an hour to an hour and a half, which is basically what any normal human being can actually pay attention to without starting to get tired. And after that, what we'll do is that we'll break up into small groups, small discussion groups, and I'll provide you every week with a range of questions to discuss with each other, which will help you to kind of hash out the concepts, but also the experiences which seem to be underlying the concepts in the books which we're going to be reading. And so I'll give you a good probably 30 or 40 minutes on each occasion to actually just talk these things out with your colleagues in a controlled circumstance. And I'll be here to help you out with particular questions which crop up. And after that 30 or 40 minutes or so, we'll then break out of the smaller circles into a larger circle, and we'll engage in a larger sort of question and answer session, where I'll ask you questions, you'll ask me questions, and we'll try to hash things out to the best of our abilities. Now, the reason I'm choosing to do things this way is that this becomes a situation in which you guys could become much more active in your own learning process. In the old Greek or Roman understanding of how education worked, their emphasis was not about, as I've said, putting information into heads. This is a very recent development in the history of Western pedagogy. In previous ages, it was always understood that the teacher was only there literally to turn you around. The Greek word was periagoge, or to lead you in a certain direction as best they could. The upshot of that is that the education experience was always much more personal, because the teacher was engaging with you as an actual embodied person, not as some abstraction, not as some abstract mind which could simply be programmed. And so I'll always try to approach you as particular people from your own particular experience and your own particular way of trying to handle the books, to handle the things which these thinkers are trying to get across to you. And hopefully the result of that will be that you actually will gain more understanding than you would using the traditional method. That's the hope, and there is actually some scientific research to bolster up this approach to education. So I'm interested to see how well it works out. Now, the other aspect, which will be much different from what you might be used to, is that I'll be approaching the texts from one very particular angle, one very particular, call it silo, call it dimension, call it aspect, which will be the overriding topic for this entire class. Each and every book, each and every test, and each and every essay. And there's only one essay, by the way. Now, the ancient term for this, the Greek word was it was philosophia perita anthropina. The modern English would be philosophic anthropology. To make that even simpler, it's to ask the question, what man or woman is. What does it mean to be a human being? What is the truest exposition of what it means to be human? What does a fully matured and fully developed human being look like? And granted some sort of vision of what human being is, what human existence calls you to be, what should society look like which actually encourages or develops or, for some thinkers, controls that nature? Now, in some ways, this is a much more difficult approach than the traditional way. In other ways, it's easier because it's more personal, it's less abstract, because you actually get to reflect upon your own experience of who you are, who you think you are, who you think you want to be, and use that as, shall we call it, the empirical resource by which to verify or to reject what's being suggested by the thinkers you're arguing or debating with. So on the one side, it's much more personal, but on the other side, it's much more personal. Right? There's no treating this stuff as abstract information off of Wikipedia when you approach it this way. You are either committed to knowing who you are or you're not. If you want to phone in, you phone in. That's your choice. However, you will not be able to engage the texts in this way by simply trying to memorize some ideas. Now, the upshot of that is I think it'll probably be much more interesting for you guys than having me spout off a bunch of facts and write a bunch of things on a blackboard. That's typically been my experience, and I've been doing this off and on for about 7 years. So that's the general gist of how we're going to be doing that. Now, I don't, of course, want to throw you guys in a deep end without any sort of resources whatsoever, and so there's one particular text, or rather one excerpt for one particular text, which we'll be using as the basic, like literally the table by which you can start structuring your approach to the books and what these people are saying about human nature. I've uploaded to the CU Learn both the full original article but also the excerpt. It's this thing, but it's titled Voegelin's Table, the file that I put up in CU Learn. The original essay by Voegelin is called Reason the Classic Experience. It's published in a book called Anamnesis. It's part of Voegelin's collected works, which I think at this point run to 36 volumes. Eric Voegelin, if you don't know him, don't feel bad about it, but he's one of the most important political scientists of the 20th century. And one of the things he observed about political science in the West after, well, from the 19th century, let's say that, is that there was a great tendency in the direction of a variety, of very interesting reductive approaches to reality. Now, that sounds a little bit general, but it's kind of straightforward when I start to give you examples. When Voegelin is talking about reductivism, he's talking about various thinkers, various pseudoscientists, various people of various stripes, ideologues in particular, who like to try to describe human nature in terms of one of these lesser or particular stratum of, well, of a full human nature. You see this, for instance, whenever you have a political scientist attempting to describe all political phenomena and all of human nature in terms of instances of power seeking or profit seeking. Now, most of you, whoever actually took a look at yourself hard in the mirror once or twice over the course of your lifetime might have realized somewhere along the line that you actually have motivations beyond power and profit, that you may not always be motivated purely, for instance, by Freudian sex drives, that you might not, for instance, simply suspect, you might suspect at least, that you're not simply a byproduct of the means of production, that you're not simply a social creation. Now, you might think there's a little bit of truth here, a little bit of truth there, but I'm going to bet that, see, some of you don't think of yourselves as meat puppets who are simply driven along in life by various abstract forces. And yet, this has become, actually as early as the 17th century, the dominant discourse, to use modern language, about what human beings are. And this is not abstract, because this has dire consequences for what a political science should look like. Basically, if people are meat puppets, then there's a certain way you need to organize society. If people are not meat puppets, then you have to completely reassess what you're doing. Human institutions and society look very, very different according to what sort of prevailing understanding of human nature is actually being taken for granted. This is Voegelin's main point. How many of you actually had a chance to look at this table before coming to class? And just show of hands. 2, 4. And how many of you looked at that and said, what the hell is going on there? Honestly. Good. That's nice. That's you should. This took me years to figure out. The advantage that you'll get is that you'll have somebody in the room who has gone through the several years of trouble of actually figuring this out and trying to figure it out in terms of human experience, normal human experience and normal human language. And so what we're going to be doing today, at least for the rest of my spiel, is going to give you a general overview, which is a taste, plant some seeds for how to start interpreting what Voegelin's getting at here about what human nature is, or what a proper political scientist or science should include in its understanding of human nature. Now, some of these are probably fairly straightforward, but some of these are in Greek, so you probably had trouble with those. So I guess we'll start from top to bottom, and we might skip a couple, of course. Now, divine nous. That's probably the first one you had trouble with because of the first line, and it starts right off in there in Greek. And the first question you should ask is, what the hell does that mean? Anybody want to take a stab at it? It doesn't have to be a good stab, it has to be a random guess. Where's the chalk?
Can I try?
Go ahead, please.
Is it supposed to look like a jug map?
No, but that can happen. That can be a byproduct of it. One variation of this, the English translation, which is a bit problematic these days, but it's quite common, is reason with a capital R. So it's not quite, it doesn't quite in and of itself get to dogmatism. It can if it's perverted. Now, the follow-up question you should ask then is, what does this kind of reason mean? What is he getting at with capital R reason? Now, first and foremost, he's getting at a very common experience, which all of you have probably had some time in your life, which is to say that what goes on in your being, what goes on in your knowing, is not somehow completely abstracted from an unfolding universe around you. That is to say that there may be reasoning going on inside your head, but the purest form of reason which you ever experienced in your life comes about when you, say, sit by a riverside or engage in some sort of fine art project or engage in really, really profound dialogue with somebody, and you feel yourself participating in reality at a level of depth which really, really grounds you in the world. That you're kind of participating indirectly in a greater order than yourself, which puts certain demands upon you. That is to say, when you're experiencing reason with a capital R, you have an intimation of reality that reveals it to you as being an unfolding order which was in existence long before you came along and will be in existence long after you're gone in some form. So it's the kind of reason which, if you will, rules the universe or rules the cosmos. It's in the world, it's in you, it somehow structures you and your being and structures the universe in some fashion. This is not terribly uncommon. I'm putting it in very philosophic terms, but if you ever talked to like a really competent, say, physicist or chemist or astrophysicist especially, this is the kind of thing which drives them. They look up at the stars, for instance, or they look at the phenomena they're observing in the laboratory, and they're getting intimations of this hidden reality, this hidden order, this hidden something or other, which somehow engages them on a very profound level. Now, what Voegelin's getting at with this putting this on top is that Voegelin is pointing out that if you look at the grand history of civilizations, not only the West, but also the East, the South, North, whatever, is that the people who have been most in touch with reality have experienced the world in this way. But he's also pointing out that this is an experience which everybody has access to all the time. That this hidden order is only hidden from us insofar as we're not tuned into it to some extent. Now, what exactly the nature and the shape of that order is usually completely beyond human encapsulation. And the minute you try to encapsulate in very simple terms, that's when you get dogmatism, which is one of the problems which can crop up in history. But we'll leave that aside for now. We'll come back to it. Now, one of the more interesting parts of this aspect of what it means to be human is that when you really engage in this form of conscious participation in the world, this kind of being awake, to use a very common term in philosophy, of being awake in the world, is that it's usually non-dualistic. That is to say, when you're really tuned in, whether you're simply in the zone, as athletes would put it, or you're really profoundly engaged in your work, that very hard habitual division we may have between subject and objects sort of gets muddled, gets watered down. It's has less hold on you, right? So it's a form of non-dualistic consciousness. And when you end up in this state where you're kind of really, really engaged, really participating deeply in the world, Voegelin is pointing out, that's when you can make real discoveries. Because you can finally get out of your own way. You can finally see things as they are without projecting a lot of concepts at them, without projecting a lot of words at them, without projecting a lot of prejudices at them, right? So it's also the way in which You don't not only touch the world more profoundly, but it's also the way in which you touch other people more profoundly. Very important in political science. You know, being able to see people who as they are, not project at them too much. Now we move down one slot and we get psyche-noetic. Now psyche is just the original Greek term. It gets translated in a lot of different ways. I usually just leave it as psyche, because we do kind of still use the word in English, but it can be translated as consciousness. Some people prefer to translate it as soul. You can translate however you want. You want to say soul, you want to say consciousness, you want to say awareness. Use whatever you want. Just use psyche if you want as well. And Voegelin here subdivides it into two different layers. We'll use the word layers. First layer is what he calls noetic. It's another Greek word, and basically noesis, for the sake of this class, or at least for the sake of this lecture until I figure out a better translation, can be translated as reason as well, but now it's reason with a small r. It's going to get confusing, but we'll clarify as time goes on. So we start off with a big R reason, that which exists before you exist, and small r reason is more your particular thinking patterns. This is you experiencing yourself as a subject, apprehending objects in the world. So this is where subject-object consciousness comes in, the subject-object experience. And this is normal. This is our normal way of living life on a day-to-day basis. You don't have profound mystical experiences about the pen in your hand when you're writing notes, right? You're simply, attending to the writing of the notes. The pen is kind of there as an appendage of yourself. It's not very profound, it's very natural. And it's not necessarily problematic in and of itself. In fact, we wouldn't be able to get along in the world without some sort of sense of ourselves and some sort of sense that there's a whole bunch of stuff out there which is not us, right? What else do I have here? Yeah. So noesis, or psyche-noetic, is that aspect of yourself, or the aspect of your consciousness, in which you deal not only with things of the external world, things which are external to your own body, pens, desks, other people in certain instances, but it's also that aspect of your consciousness in which you deal with concepts or mental objects, right? All the concepts which you constantly have floating around in your head, the words, and so on and so forth. These, for the sake of our argument, are also objects. However, they're mental objects, intelligible objects, things which subsist only within your mind, even though they obviously have some sort of reflection or reflect experiences you had of the world external to yourself. So the emphasis here is that unlike nous, or divine nous, as Voegelin puts it, in the psyche-noetic category, you're very much engaged with the world on a subject-object basis. Right. Now, right below there, you get psyche, passions, and this is fairly straightforward. This is basically talking about, your fundamental, uncolored feelings. It's the deep feelings that you have previous and have any particular concept of any particular thing. It's your gut reactions, your habits, your ethos. It's those very subtle, sometimes not so subtle energies which kind of motivate you in day-to-day life. This is the layer of your being directly underneath conceptual consciousness, or subject-object consciousness. Once again, this probably seems pretty straightforward. You all have feelings. You all know that your feelings sometimes drive you in ways. Sometimes experience yourself as out of control of your feelings. Sometimes you might not realize the extent to which your feelings might actually be taking control of your concepts, or the fact that your concepts are being thrown onto your feelings and making them worse or more powerful, or diverting them, or so on and so forth. Now, Voegelin's putting out something very simple, is that if you reflect upon yourself, you can see that you have feelings and you have concepts, and they're not exactly the same thing. They're subtly different. They overlap, but they're in some ways different layers of you, of what it means to be you. Not very hard. And underneath that, well, the next three are actually fairly straightforward. When he's talking about animal nature, he's simply talking about that aspect of yourself which you, as a particular kind of animal, share with all other animals. That is to say that you have, as you're sentient, you have senses, you have sense organs. That's your most basic way of engaging with the world. You suffer from very natural needs. You have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to take in water, you have to do your business. Vegetative nature has more to do with that level of yourself which is more or less what you would have in common with any other living thing, including vegetation on Earth. Actually, I should back up and say basically this is what in Aristotle, or what Aristotle or Plato would have called the nutritive aspect. Sometimes they call it vegetative, but it's also the nutritive aspect of human nature. That is to say that insofar as there's kind of a passive necessity to you, that's passive necessity to basically take in nutrients. That's what he means by vegetative existence. So I should correct myself and say that the need for nutrition, the need for nutrients, the need to take in basically bodily substance actually goes with Voegelin in the vegetative side, not the animal side. So that's my mistake. The animal side has more to do with sensation and your basic motoric capacities, your ability to actually move yourself around the world, your ability to perceive the world at some basic level, preconceptually. Now, the last one is the other difficult one, and Voegelin once again is using the Greek term, and the term he's using is apeiron. Now, once again, the trick here is to sort of engage you guys in what experience he's trying to point out with this word. Now, there are a variety of ways of translating the word apeiron into English. The most literal translation would be "the without limit," which is not terribly helpful, but I'll put it on the board anyway. Translations which I found a little bit better or a little bit more helpful are spaciousness, openness, boundlessness, and one of the ancient ways, one of the pre-Socratic ways of describing this was actually the word chaos. And that word chaos could either be used with a negative or positive connotation depending upon how you approach the experience. Either can have the negative connotation, in which chaos means chaos, right? Completely without order, terrifying, horrifying, leaves you with no ground underneath your feet, and you're spinning into abyss. The abyss is another common modern way of describing this. But it can also have a positive connotation. Once again, it depends on your attitude about it. The positive side to chaos, as it were, is that you experience, is you have an intimation that there's a kind of boundless possibility underlying all phenomena, including yourself. There's a certain kind of quality of limitless possibility. Quality of pure receptivity, in which you can sort of, for instance, sit there by the river and recognize that there's all these things going on, both within yourself and outside in the world. which are popping in, popping out of existence, passing away and coming into being. And there's something perhaps wonderful or magical about that. Right? But this is also something which is not simply going on out there, it's also going on in your own self. Right? Traditionally, the experience of death and the experience of one's own mortality is the most obvious way by which you hook into this experience. Anybody who's had a few run-ins, shall we say, has probably had intimations of this and had some sort of experience of this sort of apronic, boundless, chaotic possibility which they've had to grapple with and make sense of in some fashion. I'm going to stop for a second and let people ask questions if they want to. If you want to get something clarified, we'll start over here. Oh, sorry, I skipped right over inorganic nature. Inorganic nature is pretty straightforward. It's all the inorganic stuff which goes into making you who you are. All the various elements, all the various minerals, all the various stuff which has to come together and be structured in such a fashion as to give rise to organic compounds, first of all, and then from organic compounds up to cellular nature, and from cellular nature to organs, and so on and so forth. Right? It's at basic level. Some of this will become a bit more clear when you start reading through Polanyi, when Polanyi's talking about biology. I'm kind of skipping over a lot of stuff. Yeah. Aperon, depth. Yeah. It might be helpful for somebody to point out this is kind of what Jungian psychologists are getting at when they're talking about depth psychology and going into depth and so on and so forth. Or it might not help, depending on. No, it's a good question. So the question, the tape recorder didn't get it, is why is aperon on the bottom, not on top? Does it involve thinking? What way does it engage thinking? And actually, this is kind of where we get into what the meaning is of those two arrows on either side of the table. Sorry, on either side of that column, rather. The initial pass of the answer, which we'll give you today, is that the nous for Voegelin, or this kind of preconceptual consciousness that Vogelin's talking about, that capital R reason, is the origin of the word he uses is formation. So you can think of the aperon as the ultimate ground level order of foundation, whereas the nous is the laws or the rules or the source, really, of form, that which gives structure to everything else. So the image that he's trying to get across is that nous, in some sense, descends to the aperon, and stuff kind of gets built up from there. Right? And for Voegelin, but also for many of the other thinkers we've dealt with in political theory, that's true both within consciousness but also within the natural world. So if you want to think about this in terms of the natural sciences, there's a kind of the natural R, capital R reason of the universe, then the laws and so forth, and those somehow or other become present and embedded in phenomenal nature, giving rise to atoms, giving rise to chemicals, giving rise to this, giving rise to that, and all these consecutive layers which build up on top of each other until sometimes you get these weird creatures who discuss the problems of where they came from. Right?
So, if we're getting it right, are you saying aperon is limitless in a sense, like a god in a sense, not like that?
In some cultures, it symbolizes a god. If you don't have to do it that way if you don't want to. If it helps you think it through, that's fine. But Voegelin's not necessarily getting at it being God per se.
Well, I don't think like the typical God that I'm saying in the godless sense that you can make yourself the God. That's what I'm trying to say.
No. You are always limited. See, because you, and we're actually getting on to a very interesting subject of another common derailment, which Voegelin is pointing at, is that you're not simply the apparon, you're not simply the nous, you're all these things put together. You have no choice but to be all these things. You have a body, basically. Your body has limits. Quite obvious, the end of your skin. And so you might have these experiences of being incredibly receptive, incredibly imaginative, incredibly fecund in terms of your possibilities. But the reality is you have a body, you have needs, you have wants, you have necessities, and there are limits to you. Right? So that's the basic answer to that. But that being said, Western history in particular is littered with examples of thinkers who thought they were gods. And that derailment, that experience of yourself as being some sort of God man or some sort of new Messiah or some sort of Ubermensch pops out of isolating this experience and imaginatively forgetting about all the rest of it.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say, but if you're saying the major concept of it is reasoning, the capital R. So if I could conceptually like put it in my head and create like a godly form of myself, but I could make it happen. I could reason, I could think about it that way, and I feel it since it's all about, and I could justify it. I could justify my way of reasoning by seeing it in the word. By if I live among, for example, if I'm the most strongest out of the people that I live within, then my way of reasoning is limited in that sense because I feel like I'm the most powerful, and it's justified because it reflects on my lifestyle within the place that I live. If you get what I'm saying.
I think I do.
In a sense, it is possible for you to feel like you're a god, like you're limitless, and you could prove it.
You can try to prove it. You can try to prove it.
Try to prove it.
Exactly. No, what you're saying is right. This is like one of the most common sources of personal and political, well, let's say criminality on Earth, right? It's when you don't realize you have boundaries, that there are real boundaries, right? And you experience yourself as somehow without limits. People take very expensive drugs sometimes to get this experience, right? To feel as if they're pure possibility, nothing can stop them, there are no particular boundaries or limitations on who they are. And anybody who's in a sane state and not drugged up knows that that's ridiculous. But people who get stuck in that state can, during that time, be fairly dangerous, right? Yeah.
If the apeiron is sort of a limitless, open possibility of chaos, right? And the divine you is this complete engagement of yourself and the rest of these components with the order of the cosmos. How does he resolve that conflict between the limitless and openness of the possibilities and the order of the cosmos?
Excellent question. Well, give me 2 seconds. I'll do my best with this. Actually, I've got a better idea. I'm going to make you actually discuss this in the small discussion groups, because that's actually much more grounding to do it that way. You can hash it out in terms of your own experience. So we'll just go to your question, and then I think we'll go to the Wilder's question. You'll hold it for later?
Yeah.
Okay, do you have?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
About the arrows.
Yeah.
Is it forming from the top, from noose down to depth? The universe, the reason, the tabular reason forms outside of human consciousness that way, but we use the foundation upwards to make sense of what's coming downwards.
Yeah. You can think of it in terms of the universe. You have to have the laws before you have the universe, before you have anything in the universe. So the laws come into the world starts getting structure, but in terms of, if you want to think of it in terms of evolution, evolution has to go through all these stages. So laws come in, then things get built up in consecutive layers. You can't have chemistry without first having physics. You can't have enzymes without first having complex chemicals. You can't have proteins without having enzymes. You can't have cellular biology without having that previous protein level. Then you get up to the level of sentient beings, beings with senses. That's where, then somewhere along the line you might have perceptive beings, then thinking beings, and thinking beings with language. But you can't skip stages, right? But the basic laws, the basic possibilities have to already be in place for any of that to happen. Any physicist would probably say if any one of a few different, basic physical laws of the universe had changed slightly, nothing would have happened at all. You just change the gravitational constant of the universe a little bit, a smidgen, and all of a sudden you can't have stars. That's kind of strange when you think about it. But it's just kind of a basic reality.
Think of it as we have limited free will, but within a predestined situation.
Yeah, that would be consonant with the way Voegelin would express it, or Polanyi, or most of the other thinkers as well. So.
We have limits, we can't fly tomorrow. We didn't have limits, and we could, choose not to be in this body kind of thing. So we do have limits.
Exactly. You have limits and possibilities. You have a lot of possibilities, but very firm limits too.
Yes, we have some sort of predestination.
You don't have to use the word predestination, but definitely the word limitations and callings, word that Polanyi uses, responsibilities, things which hedge you in. You're not pure possibility, but you're not purely predetermined either. Actually, we're going to stop with questions for now, and we're going to spend maybe 20 or 30 minutes in discussion group now. So how many are we now? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We'll try to get into groups of maybe 3 or 4 max as best you can. So just go ahead and rearrange yourselves. Try to get into a group with 2 or 3 other people. And I put up on the board discussion questions I uploaded for this week. Now, if it helps you guys at all, this is probably, in some ways, the toughest week of the semester, because this is the toughest stuff. But we're going to be going over it again and again and again, and it'll become more clear as we get on. Everything after here is downhill. So there you go. Get together in groups and take your time and start discussing this stuff. So what does everybody think? You've been a little bit stunned. You've been thrown in the deep end of the pool. What did you come up with? What kind of experiences did you have to draw upon to try to make sense of this? Go ahead.
Everyone had their own individual feelings. I talked about when you were saying, when you were describing, you talked about good dialogue, and that's what I thought of immediately when you're talking to somebody and it's late or whatever, and you come to this point where you're just really excited because you've reached this kind of realm of understanding one another, and you
So on the one side, you get these moments of epiphany, right? Where you really feel like you've really grasped onto something which was previously just right a little bit beyond your consciousness or beyond your understanding. Then all of a sudden, maybe it's in dialogue. Dialogue is a great Socratic example, right? You're talking with somebody who also is muddling through it, and together you hit it, you get it. You've somehow connected a little bit more with the world at a deeper level. On the other hand, there's that feeling sometimes of utter spaciousness, which can be an utter freak out, because it feels like there's no ground underneath your feet, right? It can be terrifying. It's hard to relax with. Sorry, Bobby, did you want to?
Yeah, so like, when I was talking reasoning, like, the two reasoning you're talking about, like the reasoning with the subject and object,
Mm-hmm.
that's like basically yourself learning through, us learning through ourselves. And there's another one where you learn through like other people, like the dialogue and stuff. But like, when the last one was like working in the presence of the background, like, the experience I thought it was like being away far from home, and then like, but sometimes it's good, like even though like, it's a freak out and stuff, it's sometimes good because I remember after taking one of those educations.
Yeah, those are awesome examples. Actually, I think you guys had to read The Republic or some other of Plato's stuff in the last class, right? If not for this one, then wherever you took it. And what does Socrates always insist upon? Getting to dialogues with people, right? And this is very common in Socratic philosophy, no matter which particular school it is. It's what we're doing now, right? And the reason is that they found it was like a really, really solid way of getting from that psyche-noetic subject-object way of thinking to that nous experience, that sense of connectiveness, that sense of really getting it, where you're getting something in a sense that is not egotistical. But also, yeah, moving away from home, especially to a different country, a completely different culture, that'll get you that sense of spaciousness, of possibility, but also that terrifying sense of vertigo, right? You can get all those things. But it can
You sometimes kind of find out like when I first I thought like learning through other people, like subject to subject, was like kind of more superior. But when doing that subject to object, like especially in that example when you're with them, even though you can freak out, sometimes learn it.
it's a spur.
So you can't tell which one's superior.
Yeah. Ideally, especially if you want to be a scientist or a philosopher at a really deep level, you want both. You want to be able to fall away from your previous preconceptions, no matter how terrifying that may end up being, in order to then construct a better understanding of things, right? Sorry, what's your name, by the way? I should be asking people's names so I can, yes. Hillary. So you had your hand up?
Yeah. So we started off by I kind of mentioned like the moment I realized when you realize that other people have feelings too, and like when you're a small child, it's like, oh, other people have thoughts, other people are actually people. They're not just things that I'm like that I don't really care about. It's kind of impossible to understand things in that sense. And then we kind of talked about how people then are like building blocks for society and how you learn through other people, but then at the same time, your perceptions of how you view things change because of the knowledge you gain from other people. So then we talked about Plato's the cave analogy and talking about how you view things in one way, and then as soon as you experience like a different setting or like move or whatnot, and then you come back, your entire experience is different. So it's almost like that craziness of you think you're the smartest up until a point, and then you come back to like it later, and people think you're crazy because you think differently.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, these kind of experiences force you to transcend yourself, right? You're absolutely right. This is not something you only start doing when you hit university. This is already happening to you the moment you come out of the womb, right? You have to start transcending yourself, transcending your own inclination to treat your mother's breast as if it's the center of the universe and belongs to you. You have to transcend yourself in order to start thinking about other people as not objects. But that's where you start off, but you have to get over it somehow or other. Sorry, who was the other person there? What's your name, by the way?
Wally.
Wally?
Usually coming back to the metaphor of the cave and Socrates and Plato, would the noose be the sun, and when you look at the sun and get a quick glance of it and looking away, that's when you experience the aperon, the spaciousness, the emptiness, but also the possibility?
If we're going to use the images from the Republic, that metaphor of the sun, understanding that as a representation of the good, or the good beyond being, literally, that would correspond to the noose. The apiron would be the lowest end of the cave, probably, the way symbolizing it. In that particular dialogue, Plato doesn't talk about the apiron too extensively. He does in the sequel. By the way, there's 2 sequels to the Republic. We don't usually make you read them because they're crazy. But yes, so I could think of it in terms of 2 extreme ends of the cave. You have these brief moments of emergence. Well, not really emergence. You get to the mouth of the cave. You get to look up. You have a vision. Literally, the word is being used by Plato is vision of how things are, really are, irrespective of how you feel, irrespective of what concepts you have, irrespective of all the prejudices and all the notions that get stuck in your head. But then you can't stay there in a stunned state looking at the sun. You got to go back in. You got to go back into the cave, descend, you talk to your old buddies on the bench, and you struggle to come up with words to describe the experience you had, the insight that you've had out there. Sorry, what's your name?
Yeah, in terms of the first question, I was thinking a good example of that moment is maybe like your first heartbreak. You know what I mean? When everything sucks so much, you feel like the world's gonna fall apart. But then, like, you know, like maybe I don't know. There's this moment when you realize that the world is not gonna end, that you're still a part of something that's happening, and like it kind of touches on both sides of the spectrum there, right? Especially with what was it called again? The depth, right? Like when you shit, I lost my train of thought. When you realize that you're still part of the laws of the universe and that the limitlessness and the possibilities. At first it's terrifying, right? Like after your first heartbreak, because you're like, oh, this person is comfortable with is suddenly gone, there's that emptiness. But then you realize that you're still part of something, there's possibility, and that can be exciting and fun.
Yeah, you're going to give you a kick in the arse, as it were. It's not a bad example either. Plato writes he writes a couple of different dialogues on how love basically can be the basis for science. Basically, how getting your butt handed to you by love can spur you on. Funny stuff. Symposium. That's the name. Sorry, does somebody on the side have their hand up?
Yeah, well, you can go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
It's maths. So it's sort of like almost a metaphor. I've spent a lot of my life fly fishing. And so a huge river and the ecosystem around the river is kind of like an infinite possibility of variations in current. When you're going for this tiny little 12-inch fish, there's an infinite possibility of tiny flies that you're going to use. And it's all about approaching the river with that right perspective of patience and knowledge in your own experience, right? And then taking the time to sit down and think about things before you just go in. And if everything falls into place and you've got your line out there, there's a strike. And that's sort of the epiphany. Right? You're doing everything right in this little microcosm. And I thought about it right away when you were explaining this, that's what it boils down to. And when you're alienated is when you're impatient. You just storm in and start falling down. Whenever you're impatient with anything, that's when you're alienating yourself from this knowing the possibilities and using your experience with respect to those possibilities.
Yeah, you somehow feel like you're in a, I don't know, disjunction. You're not there, really. You're screwing things up. Somehow. No, I love that example because one of my very good friends and teachers has been doing political philosophy for about 30, 40 odd years. He loves fly fishing. This is what he does. When he's working on a very hard problem, he picks up all his flying gear. He goes down to the river out in Rideau, and he spends a few hours out there just being with the waves, being with the fish, being with the water, and letting things be. Yeah. And letting things go. And usually he comes up with some sort of epiphany while he's there, whether or not he catches anything, which I don't think it happens very often.
Yeah. The point is not catching something. The point is the confidence in knowing that you can take the process and drop the rest of those frustrations with that heron away from yourself and pull yourself up, right? Try to approach it the best way.
Yeah. Stuff has a way of clicking when you're in that state. And it's a very strange experience. Almost everybody's had it once or twice if they don't remember, even if they don't remember, but it's interesting. Fly fishing in particular is very meditative. Sorry, Wally?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you have that epiphany, that experience, it only happens for a brief moment, or it's not infinite, it's just one time. So you use the taxi, the in-between parts to make sense of it. Those are your foundations, your psyche, your passions, your noetic thoughts, to access the divine from that spaciousness. What's the middle part? How does that relate to the two extremes?
Well, the most immediate one, for our purposes, is, for instance, once you've had that epiphany, that fundamental experience, that aha moment, you can't, like you say, you can't just stay like that all the time. I mean, even great Tibetan meditation masters, they stop every once in a while, right? They don't just stay in that aha space. But if you want to actually hold on or reflect upon that experience that you've had, to dig deeper and to make something concrete out of it, what do you need to do? You need to find the language to express what you're saying, to express what you experienced. Now, this is true whether or not you're a great poet or you're a great scientist. Now, one thing that both great scientists and great poets do is that they have to, I don't want to say torture, but reconfigure or find the language which points at the insight that they have, both for themselves but also for other people, because usually you come out of that experience really wanting to make sure somebody else gets it, that somebody else can see what you're seeing. The whole history of science is of taking established words and reconfiguring them and reinterpreting them to point at some more deeper experience. Same thing with poetry. Same thing with art. It's all doing the same thing in some respects. But once you've done that, once you've coined language, you've gone to the heights, you've descended to the depths, you've let your imagination work on it, you come up with a word or a phrasing or an equation. Now you're kind of working more again at the noetic level, at the subject-object level. You're working with mental concepts. Right? And in a certain respect, you're also dealing with at the more feelings level, because these concepts have that tinge of feeling left over with them, which captures that original experience. That passion to make somebody else understand. That's that passionate level. Go ahead, Polly.
So you mentioned that there's Aperon at the mouth of the cave, but it also exists going back to the public's cave.
Sorry, noose. Outside the entrance of the cave. Aperon's at the other end, down the depths, like literally down the depths. Sorry about that.
And what drives you forward is the news, right? What pulls you upward is to try to find the language to explain the news.
Well, if we're going to talk strictly about the Republic and the way Plato is describing it, he just says you're compelled. He doesn't say too much about what's compelling you, but he says you're compelled. So he seems to be indicating there's something intrinsic about you that is compelling you to go outside the cave. Other dialogues, he's describing the nous is really what's compelling you. That somehow, this divine reason is somehow inside you all the time. And it's compelling you to want to understand everything. It's what drives your curiosity, your imagination. And it's drawing you up. It's what's kind of constantly kicking you in the arse, getting you to get over yourself, to transcend yourself, to be better, to understand better, to see deeper. That's Plato's way of describing it.
I was gonna mention what you just said, but if you look at it in a different way, I'll make it quick.
No, we have plenty of time.
Okay. Taking the all, what's his name?
Voegelin.
Whatever his name is. Taking his own passion aspect, on the table it says there's a specific spot that says the passion part that drive the reason too. So, from my own reasoning, would that be your natural intuition that's driving you to want to know better, to want to go outside and see the sun? Would that be considered as his own passion? Would that represent your passion? Because it's not like you're just not reasoning for reasoning. You just don't be like, hey, I want to reason today, or I'm not going to reason tomorrow. There are people that they would never use their proper reasoning until they die, simply because they don't have the natural. It's not like they don't have the natural intuition. They don't follow up with that. They're not passionate about that natural intuition to learn more, to find the truth. So it's just like it's like the slave body and the master's brain. So some people will accept that just being like that. So everyone who have that natural intuition to want to know more, but it's all about how passionate you get about it and how much do you want to follow it. So
Yeah.
if I'm making sense.
No, you're making sense.
In a way, for you to actually pursue the proper nose reasoning, the external reason, you have to be passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be passionate about that intuition in you. So
Yeah.
I think that's very powerful, modern reasoning itself. You have to be passionate about reasoning. It's like education. I can sit down in class and just take everything, and I go outside the class and I don't make use of anything I take. I just talk about it, but I don't put it in action. I don't think about it properly, but I still come to class every day. So it's like you have to be passionate. Passion is more stronger than reason itself, to me.
You have to commit to it.
The passion to reason is powerful than reasoning itself.
Yeah, you're going to like Polanyi, because he goes on about this a lot. But you're right. One thing that you shouldn't take away from this, contra many descriptions from, say, Enlightenment era Western philosophy, is that Voegelin, neither Voegelin or Polanyi, who will be going over next week, think that reason is some sort of dispassionate operation. That somehow you're supposed to be objective, quote unquote. Both Voegelin and Polanyi are saying that's not even actually possible. That thought, really profound thought, is completely infused with passion. So A, you have to be passionate about the question you're seeking or you're chasing down. You have to be passionate in the pursuit of the answer. But also, there's another aspect, is that we all know people who we'd call maybe willfully ignorant, right? I'm sure everybody's got to know at least a couple of those people. People who are happy just not willfully ignorant. Or people who just cannot seem to be compelled to really engage in thought about anything, or at least a lot of stuff. Maybe they get really passionate about the NHL stats or the baseball stats, but they don't want to be bothered learning basic economics, for instance, or home ec, right? So it seems perverse. But this is a thing which actually happens, and you have to ask yourself why. You have a brain in your head. You can learn. I know you're smart, but they don't want to learn. Yeah? And there are two aspects which both Voegelin and Polanyi are talking about, which make this possible. Voegelin adds a third, but we'll leave that for now. One is that there's a problem of passion. If somehow or other the passion for learning has been knocked out of you, you're going to stop, period. A lot of popular scientists will say everybody's born a scientist, everybody's born a philosopher, everybody wants to learn, everybody's naturally curious. But somewhere along the line, a lot of people have that natural curiosity knocked out of them. Right? That's one. The other part is that you have to become really comfortable with being uncomfortable. Thinking really profoundly about something involves becoming very, very uncomfortable. It involves being willing to pull the carpet out from underneath your own feet to look at things completely differently from how you habitually think about them. Yeah? It's kind of what's happening to you guys right now. Yanking the rug out from underneath your own feet in order to look at a problem in a different direction in order to actually understand what's just beyond your horizon of understanding. It's incredibly uncomfortable. You know, what's his name? Pavlov was once asked, apparently by one of his students, what will it take to become a Pavlov, right? What would it take to become a great scientist? And he answered quite seriously, though it sounded like a joke, go to bed with your problem every night. Eat with it in the morning, dine with it in the afternoon, let it seep into every aspect of your life. That's how you become a Pavlov. Most people would say that sounds like a sucky way to spend your weekend. And yet, if you want to become a great scientist or a great thinker or a great artist, you've got to go to bed with your problem night after night after night. So you have to gain a very high tolerance for discomfort, sometimes outright pain. And there's a third aspect which Voegelin talks about in the essay, which you don't necessarily need to know for this course, but I'll throw it in there, is that there's this problem of simple perversity of, for one reason or another, one may simply reject, the calling of reason once it's been felt. We won't go too much into that, because I don't think it's thematic for this class, but that's a possibility as well. It's rare, but it does actually happen. People who just reject the responsibility.
That's the submission of your own will. That's what happens to most religious people, pastors, imams, and stuff like that. Because you find reasoning too dangerous, and you find submission of yourself.
Exactly. Your own ego takes over. It stops you. Go ahead.
I think that there's something else, because being a great thinker or a great scientist, there's also striving for excellence. And I think that reason is an important part of striving for excellence, no matter the field or the endeavor that you're in. I prefer sort of the Zen Buddhist approach, that no matter the field that you're in, when you strive for excellence, you get the similar satisfaction that you get when you strive for reason.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
And I think that's what differentiates people in the world, that you can sit down and you can talk to them with rational discourse, as opposed to just guys that you're talking about that all they want to talk about is the baseball stats. There's a large percentage of people that I've experienced throughout my life and career that I've got a lot of admiration and respect for, and their approach is as difficult and uncomfortable as a great philosopher or scientist, but what they're doing is they're producing something.
Aye. If you're producing yourself in a way, you're working yourself. So yeah, that's also that pursuit of excellence. And maybe we should use two examples that come to my mind. A, great athletes. and they will obsess, physically and mentally, with improving themselves, with improving their form, with analyzing every stupid mistake they think they made, every erg of energy they're wasting, whatever, perfecting the skill required, right? In a certain sense, that's also a submission of your own ego to the demands of the pursuit. Another example would be one I like because I read it recently. It's a great mechanic. Being a great mechanic requires submitting you got to get over your ego pretty damn quickly. You got to repairing your own car.
It was a mechanic I met when I worked up on the elevators. He's one of the more, he would be probably a philosopher because he would track down any issue, any problem, any really complex issue.
Yeah. So all these, very good example. One more.
So do you think in all field you still have to submit yourself in a sense? Because if you want to strive for excellency, you still need to submit some part of your reasoning to that section. Because if you give just as little as your reasoning to something stupid, it might affect your process in getting what you want to get. Or if you even want to achieve the highest way of reasoning, you still have to. So in any field you go, you still have to submit yourself in a way like to stop.
You have to be willing to pour yourself into the pursuit. It's Plani's language. You have to be willing to pour yourself into every erg of yourself into the thing. At the extreme ends, you don't have to do this every day, but at the extreme ends, you want to be truly great at doing something, or perfect it, or master it. In a strange sense, you got to be able to submit yourself to it. You got to pour yourself into it to such an extent that you're basically submitting yourself that the reality you're trying to pursue, the understanding of the excellence you're trying to pursue, is just putting demands on you. They're outside yourself.
What about things that if you submit yourself to, they start becoming the reality of what you submit yourself to? Like if you're in the process of you finding the real truth, and if you submit yourself to that form that you're using, and they start becoming your reality of what you're actually trying to see.
Can you rephrase that? I didn't catch the last bit.
Okay, you're trying to find the reality of something.
Aye.
And you're using a specific form.
Mhm.
Therefore, in order for you to truly understand that reality, you have to fully submit yourself to that form
Yes.
to understand it. So I'm saying, could there be a problem if you then fully submit yourself and that form starts becoming its reality of its own self? You still don't get what I'm trying to say? Instead of
Do you
what
mean-
you're trying to see.
Do you mean you get so caught up in the form that you kind of
kinda
completely
like
lose?
getting caught up in it because you're trying to fully submit yourself so you can fully see the truth.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because you fully submit yourself, the form starts becoming its reality of
Yeah.
what it's supposed to show you.
Yeah, that's certainly a danger. You got to be able to. At some point, you need to pull yourself back in.
Yeah.
You need to rein yourself back in.
Okay, well, if you look at, I'll use the same one you used, the cave allegory example, and by the time the slave submit itself, so okay, I'm actually going to go after this knowledge, I'm going to pursue this knowledge, and if, for example, let's say he start overthinking of himself that I'm better than these people, because he is better than them, he knows better than them, and then he doesn't want to submit himself back into the sea by him to reconfirm his own knowledge. So isn't that him giving up himself to the knowledge that he was actually trying to get before? Because when you don't actually have the true knowledge, you need to walk your city which you live in. So if he doesn't want to go back into the cave, then he's giving up to the knowledge.
That's the responsibility part.
Well, that's
Yeah, you got to remember your own humanity, because there's a huge danger, especially with intellectuals, and this is, big forward thinking statement here, is that there's a huge problem with the intellectual life where people can do exactly this. They can become so enamored with the ideas that they can start thinking of themselves as, supermen, basically, to use Nietzsche's term, right? It's a huge danger. It's occurred over and over again in the West over the last few centuries. It's the source of a lot of well, wars and revolutions, is this idea that if I can come up with the right ideas and force them into reality, I can make the hoi polloi get into shape. And at the heart of this is this inability to recognize, what if all the depth of what it means to truly be human. You kind of lose track of your humanity. You forget you have a body, that you're not superior just because you had one particular insight to everybody else. That flesh and blood still puts demands upon you, puts limits on you. Yeah, these are all great examples.
What do you think is the reason why most of this new divine movement occurs in this sideways fashion, not so focused on what you're trying to resolve?
I'd rather not give any sort of answer to that. Because if I give an answer to that quickly gets transformed to a dogmatic statement. And you can simply stick with the observation that that's the case, and simply accept that that's the case. And we don't have to throw a whole bunch of other concepts at it in order to try to pin it down. Actually, Voegelin would probably say you probably shouldn't try to pin it down, because that's where the danger starts. When you start trying to do that, that's when you get yourself into trouble. Wally, we'll give you one more, and then I'll start talking again.
You said earlier that Voegelin warns against derailing by focusing on just one of the parts, right?
Yes, thank you.
So then, does the nous also become defined by after all, it's not as universal and timeless as we actually think it is. It changes based on our person, society, history, and how we intellect it.
One thing I'll probably clarify is that both nous and apeiron are manifest in reality and in our consciousness of reality. But they're not like things inside of us, right? They're not organs or something of the sort. Rather, they represent two extreme poles of human experience. But on the larger, for our papers and exams, more important issue of the derailments. Voegelin is trying to point out that any competent or honest or insightful political philosophy has to start off with the recognition of all these dimensions of what make human beings, in some sense, with some coloration and with some degree of difference, because there's a considerable amount of difference. But any real political philosopher or political scientist or theologian or Lama or Zen master or whatever should recognize explicitly or implicitly that all of this goes into being human. Right? Second, that any thinker, philosopher, Lama, theologian, religious leader, whatever, who implicitly or explicitly excludes one or more layers is either in error, is acting under some sort of illusion, or is lying or dishonest. So what Voegelin is giving you, and what I'm giving you through Voegelin, is a basic criterion for separating the wheat from the chaff. Because not all ideas are alike, and not all ideas are swappable. Ideas, political ideas especially, usually come with some baggage which may not be apparent at first blush. And what I'm trying to get at is that if the originator, the person who came up with an idea, is somehow engaging in some sort of reductivism, or is like completely abstracted from like the flesh and blood reality of what it means to be a human being on the other side, some sort of idealism, then you should probably start critically analyzing that person with much greater detail than you normally would. At the very least, you should take them with a grain of salt. And so getting back to the practical matter of papers and examinations, we're basically, for the contents of this course, or for the course of this course, we'll basically be using this table over and over again to try to analyze the text you're using, to try to analyze the thinkers we're looking at. And so I'm going to tell you right now, this is what you're going to fill out during the exams. In all likelihood, only the first column, that having to do with individual person. Maybe depending on how good a handle we have on this stuff, maybe with a second column as well. And one short essay question. And it will be open book examinations. Because what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you not just to put check mark, but also to give evidence, right? So if Philania has something to say about something which seems to you to be divine nous, you say check, page, I don't know, whatever, 54. Probably not on page 54, so don't go looking at it right now. But that's what I'm going to ask you to do. You'll have like an hour and a half to do that. But because it's an open book exam, if you put the work in to actually read the book before the exam, you'll get through that exam much quicker. Because like I said, I don't care about your ability to memorize stuff. I care about your ability to prove stuff and to think things through and understand it. And this is my way of encouraging you to read the books and understand them before coming to class.
Just to clarify, so we're going to be like analyzing whether these components are in the content of the thinkers or
Yeah.
thinkers and how they are themselves.
We're going to deal with the text. We're not going to try to analyze the thinkers themselves because they've all written multiple books. But if you were to use, if, for the sake of argument, Hobbes' Leviathan is the only example of Hobbes' work that you had to work from this, to figure out what he's saying about human beings and the society is true, here's evidence in the text. He does talk about this, he does talk about this, he doesn't talk about that. This is...
It's kind of open to our interpretation of how we interpret like divine nous. Like, are we kind of going by like like obviously there's no, like it's still subjective in the sense that each of us kind of have a limited understanding or better understanding of each of those layers.
Yeah.
So in terms of how maybe what I perceive to be as a component of divine nous might not be what someone else perceives to be.
Yeah.
This is all about how we explain our interpretation of it, correct?
Yeah, which is why we're going to keep on going over this and just keep on. I also want you to bring these tables to class or have copies of them in class so you can keep on having this in mind while I'm talking, but also while you're reading the text. And you'll slowly work out to the point, both through reflecting in the class, reflecting what we've been talking about, and reflecting upon your own experience, what is meant by these things. You don't have to have it right now. You maybe have a seed of it or a brief inkling of it, but I don't expect you to get all at once. The real purpose is to really to help you get to that point where you really do have a reasonable grasp on it. And really that's only like 1 or 2 points on the test, so if you get that wrong, it's not going to kill you. Speaking for practicality.
So what if we don't, like, for example, if you say, if you use Hobbes, for example,
Hmm.
and we don't have the pay, if you know about Hobbes and you know about Hobbes' work, and you say you give specific questions, specific example, and then you just give your reasons and you give your answers without giving like page 34, simply because you just know what you're talking about and you're sure of the person, and you just put it there, that's fine, right? But you have to
Yeah.
cite the books, it's an open book.
Now, as far as the filling out the table part of the exams will go, you'll have basically check mark or X, and if you put in a check mark, I want proof, which means cite a passage which to you indicates that they're talking about this clearly, or at least implicitly. An essay question will be an essay question. It doesn't have to be like 10 pages. It'll be, depending on how big your handwriting is, maybe a couple pages. No. Don't bother with that. Just throw the table. You will for your essays, though. And I think at least one of the essay questions I came up with, once again, it's using the table as the basis. In that case, you will have to provide more rigorous citations.
It's not complicated, right? Each one.
No, they're individual. Yeah. Each one will be on, well, first one's on Polanyi, the second one will be on Hobbes, third one will be on the first of the Rousseau readings.
Does the table, like, is that part of the quiz that you're checking out?
Yeah, yeah. When I say the tests, I meant the quizzes. Yeah. And after this week, I will be taking attendance as well. I do that not to be brutal, but because it really, really helps to talk these things out with other people. What was I else going to say? Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Classes are you allowed to use? Still.
I don't know. I haven't done the math. Let's see. We got 12 classes, I think. So after this week, it'll be 40%. I mean, you'll lose a fair chunk if you don't come give in notes explaining your absence. I can always give you a pass if you have some sort of note. That's the basic answer. So if you can get a note, or come in on crutches or something to explain, you know. Oh yes. As you can tell, I don't usually like to use PowerPoint or anything else of the sort. A, because it's useless. B, because it's distracting as heck. I don't do multitasking very well. In fact, no human being really does multitasking very well. We just fool ourselves into thinking we do. And so I don't like having a screen. I mean, I stutter when I start looking at the screen and start talking to you guys at the same time. That's normal human epistemology. And so I won't be posting anything like that online. I will be recording at least some of the lectures because I've been asked to by some people who are not undergraduates but rather scholars. Aside from this one, which I probably will put online immediately, I will not make the habit of posting them right after class. The reason for that is pretty straightforward, is because I've seen this time and time again. Every time we put lectures online right after class, or some chunk of students will talk themselves into believing that they can get by just hearing the lectures or seeing the PowerPoint notes. And I've seen it, although I haven't done a statistical analysis over the last 7 years. At least 60% of those people who have fooled themselves end up failing or withdrawing. So it ends up being a slaughter. So that is why I'm basically not going to put crack in front of you and tell you not to smoke crack. So I'm not going to put the lectures online until probably the end of the semester sometime, at which point it'll be useful for you to review for your essay maybe, or just for your own education or amusement. So otherwise, just don't ask me about posting stuff online, because I'm doing it for our own sanity and good. Okay? But I'm happy to make office hours.
You're going to post the record, so you're not going to post the recordings.
This one I'll post almost immediately for the people who are hungover. God help them. It'll be my one act of mercy. But I won't post the rest of them until the end of the semester, maybe the last couple of weeks sometime. So I don't want you to not come to class and then find out the hard way how lost you are. It happens every bloody time. Okay? Any other last questions? And I will make a habit after this time to make sure we have at least a 10-minute break somewhere in the middle. Bathroom break, food break, coffee break. And usually I think we're not going to go a full 3 hours unless we really get into it. So we'll kind of end where it naturally ends. So I guess that's about it, unless anybody else. No questions? Nothing? Okie doke. So, free to go. Oh, shoot.